In March 2013, like the Raqqa city was like the first separated city. So it was controlled by the Free Syrian Army groups and later on Nusra Front. And after a month, when Raqqa was liberated, in April 2014, two cars came from Iraq. On these two cars were written Islamic State in Iraq. And after a couple of days, they established Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. So in that time when they started to be, they were not that power, so they were not in touch with the civilians. But day after day, month after month, they started to like we started to discover them. First thing was in May or June 2013, they did the first public execution in the city. So in that time we noticed that there is like something strange, and later on like they kidnapped like a Free Syrian Army group, and later on they targeted or attacked another Free Syrian Army group, and it was like a first time to see a bomb car in the city. So in that time there were like many demonstrations in the city, so against them. So many activists, many civilians, they were demonstrating, protesting against ISIS. In January 2014, it was like the battle, the clashes between the Free Syrian Army and ISIS. Unfortunately, the Free Syrian Army was not able to control the city, and ISIS controlled Raqqa city and the countryside. And after that, they started to establish like many new rules. So they started like with the smoking rules, so it's not allowed to anyone to smoke at all. Then they announced that all the women in the city, they should cover themselves, and later on they said it's like forbidden to drink, it's forbidden to do anything. They shut down, they closed like all the universities, the school in the city, and they let like only their own school to run in the city. They shut down everything was linked with the Syrian regime, with the government. So they started to change everything in the city, and they started to target the children to make like the washing brains to them. So they changed the city from like the first liberated city to the black city.
Raqqa is being slaughtered silently is a group of activists of some guys from Raqqa and from another areas controlled by ISIS. They started as activists before ISIS controlled of Raqqa. They were as activists against Assad regime. Then when ISIS took over Raqqa, they create this group to publish and to document ISIS violations against the people and in Raqqa. And they start as a Facebook page, then they create them website, and they be as a big group as an advocacy campaign, and they wrote a lot of articles and transfer the photo from Raqqa to the world through them website. There is some of our members, they are in Raqqa, they take the photos and bring the news from Raqqa, and they send it to us through the internet, and we publish it here and edit it and change something on the photos and the news, and edit it, sorry, and publish it in the website and Facebook page.
It was like a change for all of us, because when we were in Raqqa, we decided like that we'll not leave the city, and we hadn't like this idea to leave our city, especially when Raqqa was first liberated by the Free Syrian Army. So in that time, we had to be we had like to be wanted from the Syrian regime, and in that time there was like no Syrian regime at all. So no one of us had the idea of leaving the city. But we arrived like to the point that all of us, we were wanted to ISIS. Like for me, they came to my house, they stormed my house looking for me. So like I didn't find any chance to stay in the city. So in that time I had to take my friend ID, he looks like me, and by this ID I was like able to get to Turkey. And later on in Turkey, like we didn't find it like a safe place for us. Like we stayed there, we opened an office, and later on ISIS had like a long arm to Turkey, so they assassinated like one of our members and his friend and another members of us in another like in Orfa and Gaziantep in Turkey. Like Gaziantep is one of the biggest city, and the assassination was like in the afternoon in the city center, where the area is surrounded with security cameras. So we knew that ISIS had a long arms to Turkey, so it was like not able for us like to stay there anymore. So we decided that we need to move like to Europe. So we did it like we know that there is like no safe place for us, because ISIS, they are able like to attack and to do anything everywhere. But at least Europe is like safer than Turkey. So right now we are in Europe, and we still have like some anonymous members in Turkey who are not known. So, and like this, like the third step after Raqqa, Turkey, Europe, and like we don't know like what's the next step. We don't know like if we'll be able to stay alive until we're back home. We hope that like we don't know if it will be like any more assassination for any one of us. For all of us, it was like a huge change in like our personality, our life. We were living like a normal life as a teenagers. Like we used, when we were in Raqqa, we used like to go to universities, some of us to schools, high schools, and we were like living a normal life. Like when ISIS came, when we had to leave Raqqa, we started like this organization RBSS, and later on we started like to focus about that things. No one of us like studied like any media, any journalism. All of us had no idea about like politician or like no one of us had like any political like background before the revolution. So we started to focus on that things. This was kind of a duty. We should do it for our city, because we knew that if we will not do it for our city, no one will do. So all that things started to change in us. Like we used to, as I said, to live like a normal life. Right now we're doing like many interviews with international media. We went like all over the world, festivals, and like we did like many short documentaries with BBC, with other like media agency organization. So we did like many things with like we've met like many politicians, many high rank people who had like a power to do change in the situation. So we started from these normal teenagers who had like a normal life, to be these people who have like a responsibility about their city and about their country. First of all, like when the Syrian Revolution started like against the Syrian regime. Like it started first in a city called Daraa. There were like a bunch of children. They wrote on the wall like fall down to the regime. Even they didn't understand what they wrote. So they were like watching TV, and it was like demonstration, a revolution in Egypt, and they wrote what they have heard like on the TV. So the Syrian, like the intelligence, the police, they arrested them, take their nails off, they tortured them, and later on, when their father or their families, they went there. Like Daraa city is like a tribal city in Syria. So they went there, they tried to solve the problem, to shake it, and they were saying that there are children and you should not deal with them in this way. But the police said, okay, like you can like have another children, you don't need these children, and if you are not able like to have a new children, send to us your wives, and we'll have you like a new children. So like to talk in this way with these people from a tribe or from a huge families who had like traditionals. So it was like a huge thing. They started like many peaceful demonstration, many protests against the Syrian regime. In that time, the Syrian regime was like the way how the Syrian regime dealt with the situation. They started to shoot the protesters and the demonstrations, and many civilians got killed. And in that time, the people the civilians were asking for a freedom, nothing more than that. Later on, like the demonstrations started to be in all Syria, and the people they in solidarity with the Raqqa, and later on they started to ask for freedom, because in Syria it's not allowed to talk anything about politics. The press freedom is also not allowed, so you can't do anything like in a political life, and you can't say like anything against the regime, the government, the president. So the way how the Syrian regime did shooting the civilians, the people started demonstration to pull down the regime, and this peaceful demonstration, they were like for 6 to 9 months. And in that time we had like we've listened like to many speeches from the international community, international president. They have said that they will support the Syrian people, that they will support the revolution. And later on they started to talk about many red lines. So Obama, the president of the United States, have said like many things about the red lines, and one of them was like the chemical weapons. And when the Syrian regime, when Bashar al-Assad killed thousands of Syrians in Damascus countryside, what United States or Obama did, they came and they took like the chemical weapons, and they didn't do anything to the Syrian regime, to Bashar al-Assad. So the Syrian regime used like helicopters, power bombs, squads, all that things. And when the revolution started, we had no ISIS, we had no Nusra, no Qaeda, no Islamic groups. It was like a peaceful demonstration, but like we didn't find anyone who supported us. In the same time, the Syrian regime had many friends, had many allies, Russia, Iran, China, or whatever. So why the Syrian regime had all these allies, the Syrian people left alone. So later on, ISIS came, Al-Qaeda came, and they came because of the Syrian regime. Most of the leaders of Nusra and ISIS and many Islamic groups or extremism groups, they came from the Syrian regime prisons or jails. So they were arrested there in 2012 when the Syrian regime saw the situation is so bad. The Syrian regime was so smart, and he knew that if they will release these people or these jihadists or extremists, that they will make or establish this new group. And that's what happened. So, and later on, all the international world, they came together, they did the international coalition. Many countries all over the world, Russian, Syrian regime, US, Arabian Gulf countries, European countries, they came to bomb ISIS. ISIS didn't kill that number, the same number of the Syrian regime, like more than 250,000 Syrians have been killed by the Syrian regime. A quarter million are documented. The number is more than that. ISIS killed like a few thousand, so we can't compare ISIS with the Syrian regime. So the main problem in the Syrian situation right now is the Syrian regime. But the thing that the media, the international community, the international world, they focus on ISIS and they forgot the main reason of ISIS, the Nusra, and all these horrible situation in Syria, the Syrian regime.
So ISIS is an ideology, and they can explain that ideology to the people who don't have a good culture and a good education, and they can change them brain to join to them, like what happened with some of FC fighters, and some of them joined to ISIS just for power, for money. There is many reasons for them, and some of them because they think that ISIS can fight all the world and fight the regime and fight Shia, so they joined to it.
Yeah, like the situation is so complicated in Syria because like every single day we find or we discover like a huge difference in the situation, the allies, the international war. The thing is not linked only within the Syrian people. The thing is like international right now. It's like a fight, a conflict, a war between many countries. They are fighting in Syria. So for us, or let's say in my opinion, like the situation will be more complicated day after day, and it's not gonna be solved like in 5 years at least. So that's because the situation is getting like worse and worse. So but for me, like, and for us, we still have the hope that the situation will be okay one day, and Syria will back. We know that it's gonna take a long time, that to everything will be okay, but we are sure, even not only a hope, that like Syria will be liberated. It will be like a free democratic country, free democratic united country where all the Syrians can live. Right now the Syrians are all over the world. They had a special experience. So you find like Syrian children, they can talk about politics. They had like many things, many views. They knew because they were living like under dictatorship uh, regime. They knew how like to defend themselves, to defend their rights. Many Syrians arrived to Europe. Many of them they joined universities. So of all these people, they will back one day to Syria. So Syria is gonna be like one of the best countries in the world.